Battle of the Speakers. It all started when former House Speaker Newt Gingrich yesterday offered this advice to the Republicans working right now to take back the U.S. Congress.
People are being driven to food stamps because the Democratic policies are killing their jobs. People don't voluntarily say, I want to give up a paycheck so I can get food stamps. And the fact is, most Americans overwhelmingly would rather have a job with a paycheck than be forced to depend on the government for a food stamp.
He said that the Republicans should run on a platform of this election is about food stamps versus paychecks. Well, current House Speaker Nancy Pelosi firing back, defending her party's support of the food stamp program and saying it actually helps the economy in the long run. Joining me now for a fair and balanced debate, Nancy Skinner, a syndicated radio host, and Rick Santorum, a Republican and former Pennsylvania senator, also a Fox News contributor. So just to flesh it out in more detail, panel, Nancy Pelosi came out and said the following. First of all, let me just tell you this. She says for every $1 a person gets in food stamps, $1.79 is put back into the economy. And she says, quote, "It is the biggest bang for the buck when you do food stamps and unemployment insurance. The biggest bang for the buck." And so Nancy, she says food stamps are fine and doesn't really respond to his accusation that it really should be more about the paycheck than the stamps.
Well, first of all, Newt Gingrich is the same guy who said that we have to pass a federal law outlawing Sharia law. So the fear monger, we all should run out and get burqas because somehow Sharia law is going to be adopted. So one, you got to consider the source. But two, this whole idea, I think, is said Newt Gingrich, that the food stamps, the reason that so many people are on food stamps is because 8 years of Republican policies had a $20 trillion meltdown and 8 million people lost their jobs because of those policies. Obama administration comes in and what they've done is they use stimulus dollars to get people back to work. So the only paychecks the GOP is concerned about really are the $1 million bonuses going to Wall Street, and he's got this whole idea completely backwards. He's using class warfare, and he thinks people in America are dumb enough to fall for it.
Senator, I see you shaking your head. Go ahead and respond.
Yeah, Megan, that narrative doesn't play anymore. It played in 2008. It was a great narrative. The Republicans screwed things up. You need to have us come in here and set things right. Well, they've had 2 years to set things right. They've ballooned the deficit to a record level, well over $1 trillion now 2 years running, which is 3 times higher than any deficit in the history of this country. They have seen the unemployment rate go up, not go down, even though there were promises that if you follow the Democratic path, they would in fact see the unemployment rate never go above 8%. What Newt Gingrich is saying is just reflecting the reality. Under this administration, unemployment has gone up dramatically, the public payrolls have gone up dramatically, and private sector payrolls have plummeted. They have not created new jobs in the private sector. Private sector payrolls are down since the Obama administration came into
Not
effect.
true.
But Nancy, I want to get you to expand on your point, also raised by Nancy Pelosi, that this platform, if you will, by Newt Gingrich that he's suggesting is class warfare, because that's an accusation that's been made against President Obama by a lot of his detractors. So, I mean, how do you and Nancy Pelosi justify that accusation?
Well, that's what he's trying to stir up. That is what he thinks the fear part of that will motivate people to get to the polls. But what she was saying actually is, in this economy, if we have to spend to fix it, as we had to do, and things, remember, Mr. Senator, that when Obama took office, that we were losing 700,000 jobs a month, and now private sector payrolls have increased for the last 6 months. The stock markets are all way up. Manufacturing up, auto sales are up. So to say there's been no improvement, the facts just don't support that. But when you give someone food stamp dollars and unemployment insurance, they spend it immediately. So it stimulates the economy. Then they go spend it at a department store, and that person has a job. That's what she meant by that.
Senator, it's interesting, though, because we're getting to a debate that we saw highlighted the other night in the Connecticut debate, where Linda McMahon turned to Dick Blumenthal and said, "I've got a question for you. How do you create a job?" And he talked about government, and her response was, government, government, government. You know, you can't, it's not all about government. It's about sort of being a private entrepreneur and encouraging private entrepreneurs. And that seems to be the same kind of line that Newt Gingrich is attempting to draw between the parties.
That's exactly right. And in fact, there was a study done over the last 30 years. They looked at the OECD countries and determined that for every 1,000 government jobs are created, 1,500 private sector jobs are lost. So growing government and having government do more things does not help the private sector. In fact, it depresses the private sector. We've seen that. We've seen government jobs explode in this country. And contrary to what Nancy says, while there may be some modest private sector employment gains over the last 6 months, and modest is a generous term, the fact is that there are less private sector jobs now than when Obama came. And there seems to be no hope in the future. There's just economic forecasts out this week that we're looking at 1.5 to 2% growth for next year. That means unemployment's going to go up even more because we can't grow ourselves out of this oppression that Obama's put us in.
And under the Republican policies, we had a negative 6.5% GDP. So to go from that to into, and at one point we had 3%. We've turned this around. It's the Titanic. It doesn't happen overnight.
The problem is, even if the Democrats have turned it around, as Nancy says, or are starting to turn it around, the numbers are what the numbers are as we head into this election season. We talked to Stu Varney earlier about how it's 1 in 5 mortgages are now in serious trouble. 1 in 8 Americans are in food stamps. 1 in 8.
Yeah, I mean, remember,
Rick,
under the Bush administration, poverty among African Americans and among single, never married women was at the lowest rate ever in the history of this country. So Obama's policies are not working. Bush policies worked for a long time, in fact.
All right, well, we'll see what the voters think is working come November 2nd. Thank you both so much.
You bet. My pleasure.
Well, a New York teacher manages to keep her job